New Zealanders are feeling out of pocket with the rising cost of living. The latest Kiwi Wealth investor survey makes for sobering reading. To discuss, Chief Executive Rhiannon McKinnon is with us. Thanks for joining us. So, the cost of living a major theme this year.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that over 50% of the people that we have surveyed have cited it as a reason that they're feeling less wealthy this year versus last year.
General confidence has dipped. It's quite broad, isn't it? Who's feeling most gloomy?
People feeling most gloomy are people who aren't invested in any sort of asset class. They always feel a little bit more vulnerable to changes in the economic environment. Maori and Pacifica were more gloomy as well. About 55% of them were feeling a bit more gloomy about life. And also people actually aged between 18 and 54. So they're kind of the younger generation, all the way through to 54, were feeling a bit more anxious.
What are they most anxious about?
I think they're anxious about how much things cost to take home. I imagine it's the cost of their groceries, the cost of filling up their petrol tanks. I think we're all feeling it, and I think you'll see that in the general sentiment that people have in the economy at the moment.
So it's the economy and the financial markets that are most concerning.
Yeah, I think with financial markets, what we've seen with investor behaviour is that they haven't actually changed that much year on year. And actually, you've seen people stay the course with their investments more so than you might have imagined. There was quite a lot of switching in 2020 during the first market downturn, but we've seen a lot less of that this time round. So I think people have been educated that if you make a decision about what your risk tolerance is, you should stick with it through all markets.
Okay, but in respect, they're still sticking with savings and investments.
They are sticking with, so that there's probably a bit of a shift from investments back towards savings, given the fact that interest rates have increased. So you're seeing a bit of a switch back to savings accounts and to TDs, a bit of a switch out from the likes of ETFs, managed funds, and from crypto, actually.
Why have they decided to ride the wave in terms of Kiwisaver? There's been some dramatic falls. Would you have expected people to pull out of Kiwisaver more so?
Well, of course, you can't pull out of Kiwisaver per se unless you're retiring or taking money out for your first home, but you can switch to a less risky asset class from growth down to balanced or conservative. I think potentially Kiwisaver providers across the board have managed to educate and advise their clients that switching during these market movements is probably not the best action for the long term. So people seem to be staying their course. And overall, actually, we've seen a slight increase in people who are into growth and slightly higher risk investments, which has been interesting to see.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's a general sort of maturing as, Kiwisaver is 15 years old. I think there's a lot of information out there from all sorts of providers saying, make a choice and stick with it over the long term. And I think potentially that message is getting through.
Okay. You say this is a sobering report. What are you most concerned about?
I think what I'm probably most concerned about is how people are feeling from day to day. They're feeling less wealthy. People who have got, as soon as you start feeling less wealthy in general, you see the impacts on people's well-being, their stress about retirement. So people who are sort of more vulnerable, make less money overall, may not own houses, those people are feeling real stress from day to day. And I think that's probably the most sobering part of the report, to see it there in print.
And how long may this gloom continue? Do you have any outlook?
That's beyond my field, I would say, Jono. I think that's the economist's area. I think while inflation remains high, I think people are going to remain very nervous. I think people aren't used to high inflation economies. It's been a long time since we've been here. So for some people, this is the first time they've experienced inflation at these sorts of rates. I think we'll probably have to see a decrease in those rates of inflation before people start to feel a little bit more confident.
Is there any optimism at all in the report?
I think for me, there's some optimism around sort of maturity of investment outlook. I think there's also people have changing their minds a little bit around what they think is important for investments, for ESG. You're seeing those sorts of trends changing as well, and I think that spells good news over the longer term.
In terms of our perceptions of wealth and what this survey says, is it in line with other countries? Can we match ourselves with how other countries are feeling?
I think you're seeing inflation really high throughout the OECD. I think in the UK it's running up at 9% at the moment, and I think in some of the other Western European countries it's sort of similar levels to what we are seeing. So yeah, there's an element of imported inflation, I think, into New Zealand as well as this domestic inflation. So I don't think we are necessarily better off or worse off than some of those key comparison countries, but it doesn't make it any less painful for individual Kiwi.
So what do we take from this survey, and how can we improve the situation for people?
This survey we've sent to all of the MPs. So I've sent it to the Finance and Expenditure Committee members, Select Committee members, but I've sent it to all MPs as well to give them a real idea about how Kiwi are feeling out there. So, you know, it would be good to see, you know, government responding in policies that could help to potentially reduce the amount of inflation in the economy.
Well, they've already introduced and extended the fuel tax excise and road user charges and half-price public transport. Is there more they could do?
I'm sure there are always levers they can be pulling. I know obviously the Reserve Bank is looking at interest rates and have been changing them and increasing them quite rapidly. I think that will probably take some of the inflation out of the economy. Obviously, things like oil prices are harder to control, but you know, it'd be good to see those changes and recent decreases in oil prices really coming through at the pump.